every year. My family forgot my birthday while throwing lavish parties for my brother. This year, I didn't remind them. I didn't mention the date. I just let them forget, and that decision changed everything. My name is Sophia Carson. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I work as a senior brand strategist at a high-end real estate development firm, mostly handling luxury residential projects for wealthy tech clients who want their homes to look like they stepped out of a minimalist dream. I've always been the quiet type, not shy, just self-contained, efficient, practical. I've been told my whole life that I was low maintenance, which, in my family, was code for easy to overlook. My younger brother Aiden is the opposite, charming, spontaneous, always surrounded by people who laugh too loudly at his jokes and forgive him too easily for showing up late. When we were kids, he got away with everything. Broken dishes became accidents. Missed homework earned a playful shrug. My A- was met with a raised eyebrow and a quiet. What happened to the plus? We grew up in a glassy suburban house outside Bellevue. My mom, Lydia, is a former interior designer turned full-time social planner. She prides herself on hosting stunning events with florals, themes, and full-color palettes. My dad, Robert, is a software architect who still types with 2 fingers, but has always had a deep belief in systems, logical ones, financial ones, and family ones, in his system. Birthdays meant something, at least when they belonged to Aiden. I remember my 7th birthday vividly, or rather, I remember its absence. No candles, no cake, just a late-night apology from Mom because she was too busy coordinating Aiden's soccer team fundraiser, which happened to be on the same weekend. "We'll make it up to you next week, honey," she promised, handing me a card that still had the store price tag stuck to the envelope. That makeup never came. It never did. By the time I turned 10, I had stopped expecting anything, and in some way, I think they saw that as a blessing. Aiden's birthdays, though, were full-on productions. I remember one year when he turned 16. They rented out a rooftop bar downtown. There was a sushi chef, a string quartet, and a custom cake shaped like a basketball. I wore a borrowed dress, held someone else's purse in the group photo, and smiled like it didn't bother me. No one asked if I was okay. No one noticed I had gone to the party straight from work, still in my flats and blazer, too busy to get changed. And when my own 30th birthday came around, I found myself alone in my condo, eating takeout pad thai from a paper box, while scrolling through photos of Aiden's 27th birthday bash in Napa Valley. I had sent my mom a calendar reminder weeks before, trying to be subtle. She texted that morning, "Oh my gosh, is it today? Happy birthday, sweetheart. We love you." That was it. But birthdays weren't the only place the pattern showed. It leaked into everything. College choices, job interviews, even arguments. When Aiden didn't get into UCLA, Mom cried in the living room for an hour. When I graduated from Stanford with honors, they sent a group text with 3 balloon emojis. When Aiden got a job in Portland that lasted 3 months before he quit, they helped him move back and paid off his lease. When I got promoted to senior strategist after a brutal year of corporate mergers and impossible deadlines, my dad asked if that meant I'd finally be able to take a break. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I never did. I kept my head down. I delivered results. I learned how to talk just enough in meetings. I mastered the art of being useful without being threatening. And slowly, I became very good at disappearing, until one day, I didn't want to anymore. I didn't want to be the one who always gave space, who always adjusted her tone to protect someone else's comfort. I wanted my own moment. I didn't need applause, but I wanted to feel it, the full weight of being seen just once, without having to earn it 3 times over. What triggered it wasn't a big betrayal. It was a Tuesday, a planning meeting, my idea, my slide deck. But when my manager presented the concept to the executive team, she didn't mention my name. Not once. Just a casual. We came up with a new direction, that we crushed something in me. I sat there with my coffee going cold, watching her take credit while nodding along. And for a moment, I felt like I was 7 again, holding a card with the price sticker still on it. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I just went back to my desk and started writing an email. Not to her, not to HR, to someone else entirely. But I'll get to that. I sent the email to someone I hadn't spoken to directly in almost 2 years. Her name was Grace Hale. She had once been the VP of brand at a boutique agency in Portland, where I interned the summer before I graduated. I remembered how sharp she was, how she noticed small things other people didn't, like the way a font made you feel something, or the moment in a client pitch when someone's expression shifted. She was the first person in my professional life who looked at me without seeing just a diligent note-taker. She saw instinct. She told me I had range. Back then, I didn't believe her. I thought she was being generous. Now, sitting in that office where my name had been conveniently erased from the presentation I built from scratch, I remembered her words and typed 3 lines. I told her I'd been following her recent work. I admired her latest campaign for Ilara developments, and if she ever needed fresh perspective on brand positioning, I'd love to contribute. I hit send and didn't expect anything, but she replied that evening. Her message was brief but deliberate. Let's catch up Friday. I want to hear everything. Call me after 4. That was it. No resume request, no formality, just an open door. For the first time in months, I felt a current of something unfamiliar running beneath the frustration. Not hope exactly, but maybe momentum. That week moved slowly. At work, I kept my head down and delivered like always. No one noticed the shift, but inside, I'd already decided I wasn't staying much longer. The call with Grace felt more like a conversation between old collaborators than a networking chat. She asked direct questions and actually listened. I told her about the projects I'd led, the narratives I built, the positioning work I had done for developers too focused on floor plans to think about human emotion. She didn't flatter me. She just said, "You think like an architect and a poet at the same time. We could use that here." A week later, I met her team over Zoom. They were younger than mine, more diverse, and clearly more aligned with the kind of work that excited me. Within 2 weeks, Grace offered me a consulting role with her new firm, focused on launching a lifestyle rebrand for a coastal housing initiative near Bodega Bay. It was part tech, part sustainability, and deeply rooted in storytelling. It was also confidential. I accepted without hesitation. I didn't tell anyone at my current company. Not yet. I still needed time. At home, I kept things normal. I cooked. I ran. I went to my standing Sunday dinners with my family. Those dinners were a tradition Lydia insisted on, always with matching napkins and lit candles. No matter the season, Aiden usually showed up late with a casual grin and some story about a gym client or a networking event. He was building his own sports training business, which meant he was broke, tired, and still the family's pride and joy. One night, just before dessert, my dad pulled out his tablet and showed a slideshow he had put together for Aiden's upcoming birthday. The whole extended family had chipped in for a surprise gathering at a rooftop lounge in downtown Seattle. There would be a live DJ, custom cocktails, and a catered menu based on Aiden's favorite foods. The slideshow included throwback photos, including the one where I'm holding a trophy from a spelling bee and Aiden is beside me, shirtless and grinning with chocolate on his face. The caption read, "Sibling Energy." No one in the room noticed the imbalance. No one asked what I was working on or how my week had been. I nodded along, excused myself early, and walked home through the fog. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. I didn't write about anger. I wrote about erasure, about how being overlooked becomes so familiar that it starts to feel like home. I wrote about what it meant to quietly succeed in rooms where your name never gets said out loud. And I wrote about the house I had saved a photo of weeks ago. A fixer-upper cottage north of Bellingham with cracked windows, mossy eaves, and a view of the bay that made my throat tighten. I wasn't ready to buy it, but I knew I was done renting my worth from people who never noticed I had moved in. A few days later, I gave my resignation letter. I kept it simple, professional, and honest. My manager blinked twice, clearly surprised. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You've been doing great work." I didn't respond to the irony. I just thanked her for the opportunity and turned in my badge. On my way out, I took one last look at the boardroom where my work had been erased and promised myself I'd never walk into another room where I had to shrink to fit. But I didn't tell my family. Not yet. They were too busy planning Aiden's birthday. Grace didn't ask for much at first. She sent over the preliminary client research and some early concept notes, then left me space to build something on my terms. I worked quietly from my apartment, rearranging my days in a way that made room for both clarity and rest. Without back-to-back meetings or constant comparison, I started hearing my own thoughts again. I remembered how much I liked language, not just the polished kind that sells condos or wraps a campaign, but words that meant something deeper. I started each morning by writing one page by hand before opening my laptop. Sometimes a reflection, sometimes a sentence that just felt like mine. That small ritual grounded me. It reminded me that I didn't need noise to exist. The Bodega Bay project moved fast. Within 3 weeks, I'd created a full messaging framework with emotional tone, community pillars, and visual narrative direction. Grace forwarded it to the client team without edits. 2 hours later, she texted a single sentence. "They loved it. You're leading the full build-out." That moment landed differently than any title I'd held before. It wasn't about hierarchy. It was about trust. She saw my work, respected it, and let it carry its own weight. No disclaimers, no dilution. Meanwhile, my family had no idea. At dinner the following weekend, Lydia was busy finalizing flower arrangements for Aiden's party and debating the font for the menu signage. "I just want it to feel elevated, without being too sterile," she said, showing Dad 3 versions of the same serif font, while he nodded without looking up from his phone. I asked if Aiden knew about the party yet. "Of course not," she said, smiling. "He's going to be blown away." Then she added, "You'll come early to help with setup, right? We're doing signature drinks and the bartender needs a second set of hands." I smiled, said I'd try depending on work, and changed the subject. No one asked what I was working on. 2 days later, Grace looped me into a call with Clara Monroe, the CEO of Alara Developments. Clara was sharp, warm, and surprisingly candid. She thanked me for the clarity in my proposal, then shared that she'd been following my career since a small brand article I wrote 2 years earlier. I didn't know anyone had read it. Clara told me the company had been watching how I approached quiet branding storytelling that didn't shout but lingered, and they wanted to build a new line of sustainable coastal homes under that ethos. She offered me a contract extension, plus a significant bonus if we hit first quarter targets after launch. I said yes without hesitation. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching city lights shimmer against the bay, and felt something I couldn't name. It wasn't joy exactly. It was deeper, a kind of rootedness, like I had finally taken up space I had been renting on someone else's terms for too long. I thought about that house north of Bellingham again, the one with moss on the roof and an aging deck. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine in my mind. I made a call the next morning and scheduled a showing for Friday. The agent said it had been sitting on the market for nearly 5 months, that the owners were overseas and motivated to sell. I said I'd be there by noon. Friday came fast. I packed a thermos of coffee and made the 2-hour drive with a mix of skepticism and quiet excitement. The house was exactly what I remembered, weather-worn but solid, the kind of place that doesn't beg for attention but offers it gently if you're paying close enough. I stepped onto the back deck and saw the water through the trees, the curve of the shoreline that bent just out of sight. And I knew this was it. Not a status symbol, not an escape, just a place to begin again, on my own terms. I called Grace from the driveway and asked if she could review some numbers with me that weekend. She paused, then laughed. "You found it, didn't you?" I told her I wasn't sure if I was crazy or bold. She said, "You're neither. You're just done waiting for permission." That evening, I put in an offer 10% below asking, and it was accepted within hours. I didn't tell anyone in my family, not yet. They were busy ordering monogram cocktail napkins for Aiden's party. My 30th birthday had passed 2 months earlier without a single call. Just a 3-word text from Dad. "Happy birthday, kiddo." I hadn't replied. Now, the party was approaching. Lydia sent a reminder in the group chat. "Surprise at 7 p.m. sharp." "Don't be late," I texted back. "Got it." Then returned to painting the front porch railing of my new home. I chose a color that matched the shoreline on overcast days. Soft, layered, honest. I didn't need applause. I just needed it to feel like mine. I didn't plan to post anything, at least, not at first. But the night before Aiden's birthday party, while sitting alone on the floor of my new living room, surrounded by unopened boxes and the smell of freshly sanded wood, I started scrolling through old photos, not the ones on social media, but the ones I had saved privately over the years. A picture of me at my college graduation, standing alone near the edge of the crowd with my cap tilted slightly off-center. A screenshot of the first national feature about a campaign I had led but wasn't named in. A photo of the branded notebook Lydia gave Aiden for his startup launch, embossed with his initials in gold foil. And finally, a blurry shot of a birthday cake I bought for myself 2 years ago, with a candle already halfway melted before I took the picture. It wasn't self-pity I felt. It was distance, like I was looking at someone else's life and realizing how quiet it had been. The next morning, I drove to Bellingham early. I spent the day alone, sanding door frames and measuring curtain rods. The house still had a long way to go, but it felt alive in a way my apartment never had. I opened the windows and let the sea breeze cut through the scent of paint and dust. Around 4 o'clock, I made coffee, sat on the back deck, and took a photo. Just the view, no filters. Then I took one more from inside the kitchen, with sunlight slanting across the tile. I didn't write the caption right away. I thought about it for a long time. I didn't want it to sound defensive or boastful. I just wanted to mark the moment. At 6:45 p.m., I parked 3 blocks from the venue where Aiden's surprise party was being held. The rooftop space overlooked the harbor and sparkled with white lights strung along the railings. I could see guests arriving in groups, dressed like they had somewhere important to be. I wore a simple navy dress and brought the wine Mom had requested, Aiden's favorite Cabernet, before walking toward the entrance. I sat in my car for a few minutes and took a breath. Then I opened Instagram, selected the photos, and typed. Grateful to finally share something I've been building quietly these past few months. First-time homeowner, still renovating, but already home. Hashtag coastaliving, hashtag quiet wins. I hit post at exactly 7:01 p.m. Inside the venue, the energy was exactly what I expected. Laughter, high fives, waiters passing around sliders and crab cakes, and a jazz trio playing near the bar. I spotted Aiden's friends, a few extended cousins, and of course my parents, who were already buzzing between tables, making sure everything looked perfect. "Sophia, you made it," Mom said, lightly touching my elbow. "Bar's over there." "Oh, and you brought the wine. Great. Put it by the centerpiece." She was smiling, not cold, just occupied. That was the thing about her. I never doubted she loved me in her own way. But it was a love made of details and timelines, not pauses and noticing. Dad gave me a half hug and asked how traffic was. I said it was fine. No one mentioned my birthday from 2 months earlier. At 7:15, the crowd gathered near the stairs and shouted, "Surprise," as Aiden walked in. He laughed, feigned shock, then immediately started greeting people like a politician. It was a good party. Everything went smoothly. Speeches were made. A toast was given, and Aiden glowed at the center of it all. I stayed near the edge of the room, sipping water, watching quietly. At first, no one noticed anything, but then Stephanie, one of our cousins, gasped and turned her phone toward another guest. "Wait, did you see what Sophia just posted?" Within minutes, the ripple began. Friends and extended relatives gathered around phones. A few even walked over and asked if it was real. I nodded, said yes. I'd been working on the house for a while. They were kind, excited. Some even asked when they could visit. I kept my responses brief. Mom noticed the buzz before she understood it. I could see her eyes scanning faces, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in energy. Then she saw Stephanie holding up her phone and whispering. Her expression hardened. She walked toward me quickly, but stopped a few feet short. "What is this?" she asked under her breath. "Why would you post something like that during your brother's party?" I looked at her and didn't raise my voice. "Because today's the day I finished the kitchen, and I wanted to mark it." Her mouth opened as if to argue, but she was interrupted by a waiter passing between us with a tray of mini lobster rolls. She stepped aside and said we'd talk later. We didn't. At least not that night. Aiden eventually found me near the coat check as I was getting ready to leave. "You couldn't wait one more day?" he asked, half joking but clearly annoyed. I shrugged. "There's always something planned for you." "Aiden, if I keep waiting for a quiet day, I'll never speak." He didn't respond. I didn't need him to. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed again with messages from colleagues and old friends. "You did it. So proud of you. That view is everything." But the one that stayed with me the most was a message from Grace. It just said, "Welcome home. The next morning, I left my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I made coffee, opened all the windows, and let the salt air move through the house like a quiet reckoning. The light was softer than usual, filtered through early clouds, and I took it as a sign to go slow. I didn't check my notifications. I didn't reply to anyone. Instead, I picked up a brush and started painting the guest bedroom in a muted sage that reminded me of pine needles after rain. I hadn't planned to make it a guest room. At first, it was going to be an office, but something in me shifted the day I bought the bed frame. I wanted the option to let people in, but only if I chose them. By late morning, my phone had buzzed at least 20 times. Missed calls, texts, a few voicemails. I let it sit. It wasn't that I wanted to ignore anyone. I just didn't want to answer out of guilt. Around noon, I opened it. A message from my mom read, "We need to talk about last night." Another from Dad said, "Your mother is upset. Call when you can." Aiden's message was shorter. That was messed up. No one had asked why I did it, just that I had made them uncomfortable. I didn't feel smug. I felt tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from overwork, but from years of swallowing your own voice until it becomes instinct. I waited until late afternoon before returning my mother's call. She answered on the second ring. Her tone clipped and brittle. Was that really necessary? Sophia. Posting something like that during your brother's birthday, you knew what it would do. I kept my voice level. I didn't post to hurt anyone. I posted to share something I'm proud of. That's all. She scoffed. Quiet but sharp. You could have waited one day. I let the silence hang. Then I said, "You've had 31 chances to remember my birthday. I waited every time. No one remembered this year either." Her response came slower, softer. "We were busy. You know that. It's not that we don't care." I stayed still. "I know what you do for Aiden when you care. I've seen it." She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize either. The call ended with a quiet sigh and a vague promise to talk again soon. Later that night, Aiden called. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious. His voice was less angry than I expected. Mom's been pacing the house all day. Dad's trying to make it better like always. I don't even know what they're mad about. "You bought a house. That's amazing." I let him speak without interrupting. "I guess I just didn't realize things felt that different to you growing up. I thought you liked being in the background. I thought it was your thing." I took a breath before responding. I wasn't quiet because I liked being overlooked. "Aiden, I was quiet because no one noticed when I spoke." He paused, and for the first time in years, I think he actually heard me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to make you feel small." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I know, but you didn't have to mean it for it to matter." That night, I slept deeper than I had in months. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was relief, a kind of settling into the fact that I had finally said something out loud without softening the edges. The next morning, I walked the rocky beach behind my house, collecting small shells and pieces of sea glass. I wasn't thinking of a specific plan. I just wanted to feel the ground beneath me. For so long, I had measured success in deliverables and milestones, but now I was starting to measure it in mornings without tension, in conversations that didn't leave me editing myself hours later. 3 days later, my dad called again. This time, he asked if he could stop by the house. Just him, no pressure. He said he wanted to see what I had built. I said yes. He arrived Saturday morning in his usual navy sweater and khaki slacks, holding a bakery box of scones. The gesture was small, but I noticed. He didn't comment on the drive or the weather. He just stood in the entryway, and looked around. "This place is really something," he said. I offered him coffee and gave him the tour slowly, room by room. He asked questions, real ones, about the paint, the floors, the choice to keep the original windows. It was the longest uninterrupted conversation we'd had in years. When we reached the back deck, he looked out over the water for a long time. Then he sat, adjusted his watch, and said, "I think we missed a lot." I didn't respond. I wanted to see where he would go with it, not just birthdays. "We missed watching you become this person." I stayed quiet, but my eyes stung. He continued, "We thought not needing help meant you didn't want any. We thought success without noise meant satisfaction." I set the coffee down and finally said, "I didn't need them to cheer loudly. I just needed to know they were watching." He nodded, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "We weren't, and I'm sorry." He didn't stay long. After we finished our coffee, he stood up and said he had a lot to think about. He thanked me for letting him come and said he'd talk to Mom. I nodded, not expecting anything to change overnight, but something in his voice told me he meant it. That night, I sat at the edge of the deck, watching the sky shift from pale gold to violet, and I thought about how many years I had spent trying to feel seen by people who could barely describe who I was beyond the outline. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. You can't teach people to value you by shrinking for them. You only teach them that your space is optional. I had stopped doing that. I had filled my own silence with meaning, not in grand gestures, but in steady decisions. That was the real shift. A week passed before I heard from my mother again. Her text came at 6:12 p.m. on a Thursday. "I've been thinking, if you're open to it, I'd like to visit the house, just me." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "You're welcome to. This weekend works." She responded with just one word, "Okay." Saturday morning, I opened the windows again. I baked banana bread, not because I expected her to eat it, but because the scent of something warm and simple made the house feel honest. When she arrived, she didn't hug me. She stood in the doorway for a full minute, scanning the room like she was still trying to understand why I had done any of this without her. I offered her tea, and she accepted. We walked through the house slowly. She commented on the light, the tile, the exposed beams I had decided to keep in the main hallway. She noticed details but avoided anything emotional. Not until we reached the back room, the one I had painted sage green, the one I quietly hoped would feel like a safe place for the rare kind of guest I actually wanted to welcome. She stood in the doorway and finally spoke. "I've always thought of you as someone who didn't need much." Her voice was quiet, more measured than usual. "You never asked for anything, not even when you should have." I leaned against the doorframe and let her words hang between us. I stopped asking because I learned not to expect anything. That's not the same as not needing it. She looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to fix that." I shook my head gently. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I just want you to stop pretending like it didn't shape me." She nodded slowly, then walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, she looked small, not in stature, but in certainty, like someone who had built her identity on control and finally realized what it had cost. "You were never the loud one," she said. "So I assumed you were okay in the quiet. I didn't understand that you felt alone in it." I sat across from her. It's not too late to understand it now. She stayed for an hour. We didn't resolve everything. There wasn't a dramatic apology or a hug that erased the past. But when she left, she touched my shoulder softly and said, "You did this beautifully. I'm proud of you. Sophia. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. That evening, I lit a candle on the kitchen counter and sat down with my notebook. I wrote a list of things I wanted to experience in the house before the end of the year. Host a dinner with friends. Spend a stormy night reading by the fireplace. Finish planting hydrangeas along the path to the beach. Invite Grace and her partner for a weekend. I didn't write anything about my family, not because I didn't want them in my life, but because I had finally stopped planning my milestones around their approval. In the weeks that followed, communication with them changed. My dad started sending me links to architecture articles. Aiden texted photos of his gym renovations without waiting for praise. Even my mom occasionally asked what I was working on. The questions were small, but they were new. I noticed each one. They still didn't mention my last birthday, but that didn't sting the same way anymore. I had replaced that ache with something more permanent. I had filled the space with people and work, and a place that reflected me back to myself without distortion. One afternoon in late September, I received a group text from all three of them. Planning ahead for your 32nd birthday next March. Save the date. Details to come. I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't elaborate. It wasn't sentimental. But it was a start. A sign that maybe they had begun to understand that absence isn't neutral. It shapes people. And sometimes, the quietest child is the one carrying the heaviest silence. This time, I didn't stay silent. I typed back, "Thanks for thinking of me. I'm looking forward to it." I didn't respond to the birthday message right away. I let it sit for a full day while I repainted the front door a deeper shade of blue. The kind you see in old coastal villages where houses lean slightly from wind but still stand. When I finally typed my reply, I didn't feel hesitant or cautious, just clear. "Thanks for thinking of me. I'm looking forward to it." I didn't overthink the tone. I didn't add emojis to soften it. I just said what I meant and meant what I said. That felt new. At work. The Bodega Bay campaign had entered its final stretch. Grace's team trusted me completely, and the clients had given full creative freedom. We leaned into storytelling that focused less on square footage and more on sanctuary, messaging around emotional return on investment, not resale value. I poured everything I had into that launch, not to prove anything, but because I finally had the space to create without explaining my presence in the room. The difference was subtle but profound. I was working without fear of being edited out. One Friday afternoon, Clara called me directly. "I know we said we'd wait for Q1 results," she said, "but I'd rather not." I held my breath slightly, unsure where she was headed. "I want to make your role permanent. Full creative lead. You've shaped something we didn't even know we needed." I didn't answer right away. I stood at the kitchen counter with my hand resting on the closed notebook where I had once written down every role I thought I needed to earn to be seen. Then I said yes, not because I needed the title, but because I was finally ready to own what I had built. That weekend, I hosted my first dinner in the house, just a few people. Grace, Ellie from design, 2 friends from college who had stayed in touch through jobs and breakups and silent stretches. I cooked slow-roasted chicken with rosemary, poured wine into mismatched glasses, and watched the room fill with quiet joy. No performance, no networking, just presence. After dessert, Grace pulled me aside and said, "This place feels like you, not curated, just lived in and honest." I smiled, knowing it was the highest compliment she could give. A few days later, Aiden sent me a message. It wasn't long, just a photo of his gym's new signage with the caption, "Finally feels real," I replied. Looks great. You should be proud. That was it. No sibling rivalry, no tension. Just two people who had grown up side by side but were finally walking their own paths. It took us 30 years to get there, but we got there. Then came November, a quiet one. The kind of month where nothing big happens but everything deepens. The hydrangeas I planted in late summer had started to brown around the edges, but I left them alone. Letting things die back is part of the cycle. I was learning not to fix everything, not to force clarity where growth needed space. One evening, while reading on the deck with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I received a call from my mom, not a text, an actual call. She asked if I'd like to help her plan something for my birthday, not for Aiden, not for the family, just mine. I hesitated, not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't know how to answer a question that had never been asked. Sure, I said, careful not to overcompensate. Something simple would be nice. She asked what kind of cake I liked now. I almost laughed, not unkindly. Chocolate with sea salt, I said. And no balloons, she agreed, then paused. Can I bring a photo? I asked. Which one? She said. The one of you with the trophy. I think I finally understand what it meant. I ended the call and sat in silence. Not with pain, but with something close to peace. Not because my family had suddenly become perfect or had rewritten the past, but because I had. I had taken the story I lived and rewritten my place in it. Not the facts, but the focus. I was no longer background. I had stepped into the frame, not needing permission, not needing applause, but fully centered in my own life. The tide was rising that evening. The waves curled softly along the rocks below. I watched them in the fading light, a rhythm both new and ancient, like the sound of someone finally saying your name after years of forgetting. I didn't need a toast. I didn't need a crowd. I just needed this moment to stretch across time and fold gently into the one that came next. Winter came gently that year. The wind along the coast wasn't violent, just persistent, like a soft knocking that never stopped asking for your attention. I found myself slowing down in ways I hadn't before. Mornings were longer. I let my coffee get cold sometimes. I read entire chapters without checking my phone. The house creaked more in the cold, and I started to learn its patterns. That's how I knew I was home. When a place begins to make its own language and you respond without thinking. The campaign for Bodega Bay launched just after New Year's. Grace called me at 6 a.m. to say the first round of press coverage had gone live. Industry blogs praised it for its emotional clarity, for balancing serenity with ambition. The client's numbers exceeded projections within days. Clara sent a handwritten note. Something almost no one does anymore, she wrote. You didn't just brand a property. You gave people a story they could see themselves in. I read it twice and left it on the windowsill beside my desk. Later that week, I had lunch with Grace at a quiet cafe tucked between two galleries. She had just flown back from a strategy conference and looked exhausted in that dignified, well-earned way. Midway through her second cup of tea, she leaned forward and said, "Have you thought about teaching?" I blinked, not expecting the question. She continued, "You don't just build things. You model integrity. We need more of that, especially for women just starting out." I didn't answer right away. Teaching had never been on my roadmap, but her words stayed with me. At home that night, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. What if the next season is not about rising, but about lifting? I let the question sit on the page, unanswered. February was quiet. I spent weekends repainting the baseboards, clearing the attic. learning how to reset the water heater when it groaned too loud in the morning. The silence was no longer something I resented. It became part of the design. One evening, while placing new curtain rods in the guest room, I got a text from Aiden. Random question. What color should I paint the front desk wall at the gym? Beige is starting to depress me. I smiled and replied, try a soft slate blue, calm but focused. He answered 5 minutes later, ordering paint now, you always know. It was the first time he had asked me for anything without joking. That mattered. Then March arrived, and with it, my 32nd birthday this time, no one forgot, a week before the day. My mother called to confirm lunch reservations at a small coastal restaurant I had mentioned once in passing. They had an opening, she said. I thought it felt like you. The phrase surprised me more than the gesture. I had spent years being cast into other people's idea of who I was. Now she was trying to listen. My father offered to drive, said he wanted to see how the road curved this time of year. Aiden sent a voice message instead of a text. Let me know what you actually want this year. No guessing. I'll get it. I didn't expect perfection. I didn't even want it, but I wanted presence. And that's what they gave. The day was overcast, but the kind that makes colors feel deeper. We sat by the window with a view of the water and ordered simply, no candles, no big toast, just quiet conversation. They asked questions about the house, about my work, about my garden plans, not surface-level filler, but real interest. My mother gave me a small gift bag wrapped in tissue. Inside was a single photo frame. In it, a picture I had never seen. I was 8, sitting at the edge of a pier, legs dangling above the water, a book open on my lap, and no one else in sight. She said she had found it in an old envelope from a trip we took once but never printed. It looked like you. She said quietly, really you. I didn't cry, but I felt something unstick inside me. That evening, back at my house, I walked down to the cove just before sunset. The tide was low, the sand still damp from the morning pull. I stood there a while, looking out at the vast line where water met sky, not waiting for a sign, just being still. Then I walked back up the hill, barefoot, slow, and lit the lanterns along the porch, inside. The house smelled like lemon oil and cedar. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and opened the notebook again, on a fresh page. I wrote. They remembered, but more than that, I didn't need them to, and somehow that made it easier for them to show up. April brought rain that didn't apologize for its weight, the kind that came in long, steady lines across the glass, soaking into everything slowly, refusing to be ignored. I didn't mind it. The sound of it against the roof gave the house a kind of rhythm I hadn't known it needed on quiet days. I stayed in the reading room, watching the trees bend under the wind and thinking less about progress, more about continuity. I didn't need the kind of momentum I once chased. What I had now was steadiness. Work was still busy, but it no longer defined me. Grace had offered me a position to mentor junior strategists in a pilot program she was building for women in brand leadership. I said yes without hesitation, not because I felt ready, but because I knew what it felt like to have potential ignored simply because it arrived without noise. I began holding one-on-one sessions with designers, analysts, and writers in their first few years out of school. Most of them were like I had once been quiet, exacting, unsure of what was too much to ask. I saw them clearly, and that, in itself, was the gift. One afternoon, after a session with a young strategist named Priya, I received a message from my mother. We're clearing the attic next weekend. Would you want to come by and look through your old boxes? I didn't answer immediately. I stared at the screen and tried to remember the last time she had used the word "your" about anything connected to space or memory. Eventually, I replied, "Sure, I'll come by Saturday morning." Their house hadn't changed much. The same beige carpet, the same ceramic dish by the front door for keys no one used. My father met me at the top of the stairs and led me to the attic without preamble. We didn't open anything yet. He said, "We thought you should be the one to decide." The gesture wasn't dramatic, but it felt like a shift. Inside the attic, it smelled like paper and old wood. The boxes were labeled with names in my mother's handwriting. Aiden's boxes had dates and contents neatly listed. Mine were labeled SC in faded ink, with no detail. I sat on the floor and opened the first one. Inside were programs from piano recitals, awards from spelling bees, a yellowed essay from 5th grade titled, "What I Want My Life to Look Like." I had forgotten writing it, but reading it now was like listening to a younger version of myself whisper from another room. I want to live near the water. I want to write something that matters. I want people to know who I am, even if I don't speak loudly. I didn't cry, but I closed my eyes for a moment, as if to say thank you to a girl who had known what she needed long before anyone else did. I took a few things with me: the essay, a concert photo, a letter from a teacher I barely remembered, but whose words still reached me. As I stood to leave, my mother appeared in the doorway. She didn't enter the attic. She just said, "I didn't know you had written that, about the water." I smiled lightly. I guess I've always known who I was. I just didn't always know how to ask for it. She nodded slowly, then added, "I'm glad you got there anyway." Driving home, the boxes beside me in the passenger seat, I felt something unstick further. It wasn't about resentment or even repair. It was about restoration, not the kind that erases the cracks, but the kind that honors them. Later that week, Aiden texted me a photo of a shelf he had built in the gym's reception area. Not crooked this time, he joked. "Thanks for the paint wreck." I sent back a thumbs up, then wrote, "Looks clean. You did good." He replied, "Trying to keep up with you. Big sis." That was the first time he'd used that phrase since we were kids. I read it twice, then let it go. No need to over-celebrate. Sometimes acknowledgement is loudest when it arrives without fanfare. At home, I started planning a summer gathering. Nothing elaborate, just a weekend where people could come and go. I invited Grace, the women I mentored, Ellie, even a few neighbors who had waved kindly through the months. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I invited my family, not because I needed them there, but because I was no longer afraid of who I might become around them. This house had given me that, a place where I had become fully myself without waiting for anyone to notice. The day of the summer gathering arrived with skies that couldn't decide whether to be blue or silver. I didn't mind. I had learned to stop looking for perfect weather. Instead, I focused on the table I had set on the back deck, simple dishes and a few hand-picked flowers from the edge of the property. The house smelled faintly of rosemary and clean linen, nothing extravagant, just ready. The first to arrive was Grace, carrying a bottle of wine and a small envelope. She hugged me like we hadn't seen each other in years, even though it had only been a few days. The envelope held a note. "You didn't just build a home, You rewrote what it meant to belong. Ellie came next, arms full of pastries and stories about her last trip to Lisbon. The junior women from the mentorship program arrived shy at first, but slowly found their voices. I watched them laugh with one another in my living room, like they had always belonged there. The air inside felt warm, not just from the heat, but from something quieter, presence, safety, ease. Later in the afternoon, I saw my father's car pull into the gravel driveway. I took a deep breath and walked to greet them. My parents stepped out slowly, dressed casually but deliberately. My mother held a small gift bag, and my father had a neutral but earnest expression that somehow said more than words. Aiden was with them too, carrying nothing but his usual charm and an energy that had softened lately. No one overcompensated. They didn't show up with balloons or dramatic apologies, just themselves. I gave them a quiet tour again, this time at my pace. When we reached the back deck, my dad pointed to the corner where I had planted herbs. "You always liked order," he said. I nodded. "But I like mess, too. As long as I choose it." He chuckled softly, then stepped aside for my mom. She handed me the gift bag. "It's not much," she said, but I saw it and thought it belonged here. Inside was a small ceramic lighthouse, pale blue and weathered, with tiny windows carved into its base. I turned it in my hand and said, "It's exactly right." She smiled, relieved but unsure. I didn't make her reach further. Dinner was quiet and full. I had prepared everything myself, not out of pride, but out of preference. I liked the way it felt to feed people on my terms. Around the table, the conversation moved in slow arcs. Not everything was easy. There were still moments when my mom interrupted too quickly, or when my father looked distracted, just as I was saying something important. But I didn't shrink. I didn't rush to redirect. I let myself be heard without pushing. It was enough. As the sun lowered behind the water, Aiden asked if he could walk the path to the cove. I joined him, sandals in hand, letting the sand catch between my toes like it had hundreds of times before. We didn't talk until we reached the shoreline. Then, without looking at me, he said, "I think I needed to see this to understand." I didn't ask what he meant. I let him take his time. I used to think you were just distant, like you didn't want to be part of things. But I see now you were just building something different, something that didn't need everyone's attention to be real. I looked out over the water, let the breeze move across my arms. It wasn't that I didn't want to be seen. I just got tired of yelling into rooms where no one looked up. He nodded slowly, then added, "Well, I see it now, and it's pretty incredible." When we got back to the house, the sky had darkened into that deep navy that only happens right before stars make their entrance. I lit candles along the porch and let everyone settle into their own pockets of conversation. My mother stood near the window, watching me without speaking, not studying, just noticing. That was new, before the night ended. I walked her to their car. She hugged me, brief and firm, then said, "I know we can't go back and do things differently, but I want to be better at doing things forward." I held that sentence longer than I expected. "So do I." I said, "So do I." After they left, I sat on the steps alone. The house behind me glowed softly. The voices of friends drifted in and out through open windows. The ocean exhaled in quiet rhythm below. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself a long time ago. And finally, they had started to catch up. I don't know what future birthdays will look like, or how many more conversations we'll have that will feel unfinished. But I know this. My story isn't about who forgot me. It's about how I remembered myself. Have you ever had to stop waiting for someone to notice your worth before you could fully claim it if this story felt familiar? I'd love to hear yours, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop asking to be seen and start building a life where we no longer need to ask.